Hi, and welcome to Grace Space. Here at Grace Space, we have an holistic approach to mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health and well-being. We hope that our conversations will be informative and inspirational. Grace Space is a safe place to share, discuss, and learn. As always, we are going to begin with a prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the measure of health and strength that we have currently. We thank you for traveling grace. We thank you for guiding our steps and ordering our way. Lord, we ask you to be in and among us this evening and provide knowledge as we share one with another. In Jesus' name, amen. So tonight I have a pre-recorded interview. I wanted Reggie Gilkison to be a guest on the show, but he runs one of his groups during the time that we are on. And so I'm going to play the pre-recorded interview, and then afterwards we'll have a discussion. This company, Growth, Wellness, and Change Center. Reggie, would you give us a little bit of information? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you, Jada. I'm completely honored to be a part of your platform. I know that whatever you put in place, I know it's going to be insightful, but more importantly, impactful. And so thank you so much. You're someone that I truly look up to, and I admire you and Frank Earl, your husband, Frank Earl, and the family, and Morgan State University alumni. It is an honor to be on this platform. But again, like you said, my name is Reginald Gilkison, or Reggie Gilkison. I'm a licensed therapist, actually a licensed clinical social worker with a certification in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a national certification. And so I work with all populations, from anywhere from children to our senior adults, and also other populations as well. So that's pretty much what I do, and the commitment that I have to providing what I'm trained to do, and that's to help people.
Can you tell us a little bit about your career path?
Sure. Well, my career path started probably as when I was born, to be honest. But I never thought beyond my wildest years that I would ever be a therapist or be a social worker or clinical social worker and work with people at all. But I grew up in a home where my mom was a teacher. Later, she became a school counselor. And my dad, actually, who's passed away about a year and a half ago, he received his degree from Shaw University in urban science, which would have been social work. And so when I went to high school, I was ordered to do community service as a result of getting in some trouble. And I started working with young people in East Baltimore, Maryland, with my high school. And it was a tutoring program where we worked with youth that were, I would say, low-income youth in a tutorial program. And that's where I first got my start. But I have been working with children. I started working with children, again, at 17, but I really started working with children right after that, as early as 21, 22, when I was working in the Boys and Girls Club. And so I found that to be my calling. At one point, I didn't think it was my passion, and I left it to try to go in corporate America, but I came back shortly after because I knew this was my passion, to really want to help people and to also help others that have been through similar challenges that I went through in my childhood and adolescence and even early adulthood development. So, but that's just I guess a synopsis of how I came into the field. And and I'm still in the course. I'm in the field as a therapist now, and that's how I got there. I'm currently a licensed clinical social worker, so I'm still a social worker, but I'm licensed to provide therapy and mental health counseling and support.
And how is that program set up? How do you provide those services? Is it individual, is it group, or is it both?
So I under my my company growth, my agency, Growth Wellness and Change Center, I do a array of things. So I for my private practice, I work individually with both individuals in a therapeutic session. I also do groups. I work with families, but I also collaborate or partner with other agencies. In one particular agency, Primary Care Solutions, where I'm the director of what's called Intensive In-Home, which is community-based mental health and clinical partnerships. So I do an array of things, and also I work also with Charlotte Mecklenburg County NOVA program, which is New Options for Violent Actions, which is a domestic violence program for men, where I'm a facilitator 2 days a week. So under that program, I do an array of things, but I primarily focus on working with both individuals and families.
Now, what do you see, and we'll break it down in age groups, in your work when you're working with young people, do you work with males and females or primarily with males?
So I work with a diverse population, with be males and females, the LGBTQ, and so again, my work is I work with children as young as 3 or 4 years old, because I'm a developmental. I'm considered to be a developmental therapist, where my goal is to work with and focus on the development of that child. So it could be a young child, it could be adolescents, male or female, it could be a child with autism, but it's diverse of who I work with.
And what do you see are, if you were to name the top 3 issues in our community, what would you say they are?
Well, in our community and other communities that are similar, of course, what I've found in my work is that the biggest challenge is the family system. When the family system is broken, or if there's some major impairment in the family system, then that creates a trickle down effect with that child and the family in each of their other systems, whether it be in school, whether it be in the community, whether it be just in everyday life. But from my experience, that it all starts with the family unit, which of course starts with your caretakers or parents or your family of origin. And so, and that's where a lot of my work is to try to meet that particular child or family where they are, and help them to deal with any specific challenges as they come up.
And so the breakdown in the family, that would be one. Would you consider the breakdown in the village, the
Yes.
community being able to work together?
Yes, and you'd asked me for 3, and you're right, and I didn't elaborate. I apologize, but yes, it starts with the family. And when we look at the family, if I was to put a concentric circle around the child, the next circle is going to be the family. And then after that, it's going to be the community. And then from that point, it's going to be society. And all those particular systems both coincide with one another. And so when we have strong families, generally we'll have strong communities. When we have strong communities, of course, we'll have strong societies. But everything starts in the core of that circle, and that's the child in that family.
Now, do you work with the school system? Have you done work in the school system, and do you continue to work with the school systems?
Yeah, so I was a school counselor for 10 years, but I was working as a school counselor. Well, I started off as a teacher, before I went to graduate school to pursue my master's in social work. Never thought I would teach because I saw my mom teach, and she retired she didn't retire as a teacher, she retired as a school counselor, and I saw all the challenges that she had growing up. I said, I would never do that. Well, lo and behold, I had an opportunity to go into teaching, and I actually enjoyed it. I loved it. But what I could not do is, as a teacher, when I was dealing with, I could do the academics, and I could do the teaching, I could provide the instruction, but I had less time to work with the family and again that system. And so I already knew that I had to go, to pursue my master's degree so I can work with the system. But while I was working in the school, I had opened an agency for about 11, 12 years with a childhood friend. But in 2020, we both decided to go in a different direction. I wanted to step out on my own. But currently, I still work with the schools and what I do is I provide what's called the wraparound approach. I don't know if you've heard that term, but a lot of people consider it what's called the wraparound service. It's not a service. It's a support, right? When you're working with the school, when you're working with all those individuals or systems that support that child and that family, that's where we get into what's called the village. Because the village is not always there, but we do have systems. And so when we bring all of those together, starting with the school, starting with the religious community, or just in the community and at large, then we're wrapping around that family, which is driven with the focus on that family, but it's guided by others that are willing to provide different type of services or different type of resources to that family.
Okay. And do you feel like we are moving in the right direction as a society, and particularly in our culture, when it comes to addressing mental health needs?
I think we're making progress. I mean, a lot of what we're seeing now with social media, and social media has a huge impact on us, whether we want it to or not. It has a huge impact. And some of your big, even entertainment platforms like the Breakfast Club, they're promoting mental health. There's a co-host named Charlamagne the God, is one of the most highly watched and viewed syndications called the Breakfast Club, based out of New York. And Charlamagne the God is very transparent of sharing his mental health challenges. And I admire it. But there's so much there. Here's the challenge that I see with mental health within the African American community and other similar communities, is that the worldview traditional mental health is that there's something wrong with you, and that is so far from the truth. There's no perfect person, but we all, if we do our deep dive, we've all been through similar challenges and similar experiences. But we have to change the narrative of mental health. It is exactly what it says: mental and health. If you are needing to take care of your physical health, you go to a doctor, right? And so it's the same thing with mental health. But again, it's the stigma that makes it a challenge. And it doesn't just have to be therapy. It could be just speaking to someone that you trust, or talking about what it is that you desire to accomplish in your life. It's all in one big pot of the recipe of mental health. But if we just focus on that therapy is the only part, it is a huge part of it, and I think it's I highly recommend it. But we have to include mental health as a part of our health.
And now you mentioned that you work with people that have been involved with domestic violence.
Yes.
And so do you, in that area, do you work with, is it a broad spectrum? Like, do you work with the people that have committed domestic violence as well as those that have been subjected to domestic violence?
So with the county, with the NOVA program, again, is the acronym stands for New Option for Violent Actions. This program works specifically with the perpetrators of domestic violence. I work with the males. There is a female component, but of course we know that the statistics are higher for males perpetrators than it is females. And so in that program, I work with the perpetrators for 26 weeks or more. And the reason why I say or more, because they have 26 weeks to complete, but that's if they attend consecutive. And even if they attend 26 weeks, there's holidays, there's breaks, so they're not always going to complete it in 26 consecutive weeks. Mm-hmm. But that is that program is being a domestic violence facilitator with the men is, I'll be honest, is my most fulfilling, because again, we're dealing with mental health. When we're meeting them on the front end, and it's an advantage for me as a clinician, as a facilitator, because 95 or more of those perpetrators, those men, are required to be in the program. So they have to be with me in my co-facilitator for 26 weeks. But what we find is that during that initial phase, we tap in more of the core. We go from their childhood, their development, how they got to that point. And by 26 weeks, they're able to be more self-aware of not only how they got there, but even the choice of relationships that they chose to be in, and also some of the other challenges that preempted them to act out physically or verbally or whatever way that they perpetrated the act.
And are you finding that you are making a difference?
Yes, and yes. And that is one of the, and this is one of the most, like I said, again, fulfilling, because you actually see the growth. Some of our men can come, and when we think about domestic violence, we don't get the men that are just physically violent, right? They don't, you think about the domestic violence, you think about Ike Turner and what he did to Tina. It's not always to that extreme. Sometimes it's just not, it's threatening, or pushing the young lady, or it could be even just communicating threats, like I said, over the phone, or stalking.
And there's emotional abuse, there's psychological abuse, and there's financial abuse. Absolutely.
And we use what's called the Duluth model. If you look that up, it is the models of wheel, domestic violence wheel, and it is research based, and it's highly effective in working with domestic violence. But we go back, we use that, but we go back from the origin of the day they were born. And we connect the dots, and they connect the dots. And by 26 weeks, they realize, hey, I'm ready to change.
And I think we were talking earlier about, the circles and society. And I think that one of the challenges for young people is that there is so much, and I am not anti-hip-hop, can't say I'm a fan of gangster rap, but there's so much aggression, in the music. And historically, we have not always had people to defend Black women. And so Black women have not, and I'm speaking, as part of that culture, Black women have not always been honored and revered. And we have not always challenged when videos, music, movies, comedians have disregarded or disrespected Black women. And so there are people in our culture that don't see it as the problem that it is. And so if you grow up listening to that music, watching those videos, admiring people that behave this way, it appears to be normal.
Right. And you brought up a great point. In fact, that was the point I was going to make, the normalization. And let me before I even get to that point, let me say about hip hop or music or entertainment. It is an influence. It's going to influence you. And generally, entertainment and music is going to meet you where you are. And so that's why it's important with our relationship, when relationships, to meet that person. We have a relationship with someone. We get in a relationship, an intimate relationship, or so forth. We connect with that person where they are. But to get back to your point, you're absolutely right. Women are one of the most oppressed and mistreated groups throughout society since the beginning of time. In fact, when we look at just historically, just based off of systematic laws or just whatever it might have been on a systematic level, whether it be laws or maybe women being able to vote or being able to have the same type of liberties as their male counterparts. What we see, the correlation with that is just like with racism and systematic racism, is that the mistreatment of women and people of color it starts with the naturalization of it being natural to mistreat or to oppress that particular group. And when we look at it from a lens, you can look at it from a lens again of racism and slavery. Black people, African Americans, were treated as property, right? They were not treated as human. So when you don't treat someone human, you treat them just like any other object, which is objectification. So where I always put it I sum it up by saying, the more we mistreat and we see, mistreat or we see negative treatment or oppressive treatment, it becomes natural. In other words, you do it and you do it in everyday life. But when you that's the normalization. Then you get to naturalize it. You do it without even thinking. But then what happens is, over a period of time, it's objectification. Hey, I can treat in domestic violence. If you do something to make me mad, if I just hit you or call you out your name, I'm treating you as an object. And so that's what we want to address, especially when we get into the issue of women or race or even the LGBTQ. These are people, and we have to treat people as such.
And when you label people, you take away the fact that they are human. So, for instance, if I call you, a derogatory name, if I say they, them, then I'm dehumanizing you. And then it's okay for me to mistreat you because I see you as less than. And that's why we have to be very careful on the words that we use and the words that we use allow other people to use in our presence. Because what happens is the seed is planted. They're not immigrants, they're illegal aliens.
Right.
And so now I don't have to treat them as human. I don't have to respect them. I don't have to acknowledge them. I don't have to care.
Right.
If someone commits a crime, they're a thug. And once I label you, then I don't have to see you as human.
Right.
And with women, it's once I become comfortable calling you a hoe or calling you the B word, then I am comfortable disregarding and disrespecting you.
Right.
And I know that is a major problem because if you are not seeing, from a female perspective, if a young girl is not seen as a young girl, if a woman is not seen as being worthy, if you devalue them, then not only does it affect their mind, it affects their body and their soul. Because it's hard to be whole when you're not valued.
I 100% agree with you. What we're seeing in a lot in working in the pathological side of the field is that we're seeing that, one, it starts with this sense of self. And when we look at our hierarchy of needs, right, before we as individuals, we grow and we achieve at our highest potential, we have to have our basic needs met, right? And again, like I said, when we talk about the family systems, it all starts with the family system. If a child is born in a home where there is nurturing, where there's love, where there's consistency, that child can navigate through the different phases of their life. But what we also see, again, like I was saying earlier, is the influences. And so when the social media or music or just outside influences are there and they're educating us versus being educated in your own home, then using, for example, the hip hop music, if that's what they're seeing, if they're seeing that, hey, I'm the N-word, or a woman is a hoe, or a B, or whatever, then that becomes into your psyche. And you treat people based off of, one, how you see yourself, but also how you're influenced. And here's the biggest thing as a developmental therapist, what I look at, and I teach this to my young therapists or students, is that the first thing we need to look at anytime we work with individuals, I always explore what I call the 3 E's. In fact, it's 4, but I'll start with 3. And those 3 E's are your experiences, what you've been exposed to, and your education. And if you have positive or healthy experiences, you're going to be, that generally gives you an advantage to be able to cope in a world that is challenging and at times difficult. But more importantly, when you're exposed to positive things, it gives you a level of awareness of not, what's going on around you, but also what's going on out in the world. And then education being not necessarily what you learn in school, but what have you learned along the way? Have you learned that you have to respect adults? Have you learned that how to budget money? Have you learned that education, getting your education can open up doors for you, and how do you do it? This is what you're learning along the way. But what I add as a 4th E when I'm working with individuals is I examine your environment. What type of environment are you living in? What type of environment are you primarily spending most of your intimate time in? All those things, again, are influencers. And when I look at that, it can give me a trajectory of the direction of your life. And I'm being honest with that. I can literally almost really get a good sense of where you're going. I wanted to make my point on this, and I don't want to monopolize the time, but what I use in working with my guys, we have a topic that we work for 3 weeks called where we focus on children and domestic violence. And we find that many of the adults that I work with, whether it be in the domestic violence setting or adults that are dealing with severe impairment, is that they were mistreated, right? They were abused. They had trauma, and much of it is unresolved. And so what I used, I actually, in that first day of the topic, I played the documentary by Michael Jackson. If you remember years ago when he was interviewed, it was a gentleman that just they did a documentary. He for several days he just traveled with Michael throughout his life. And when you look at the trauma that he went through, the first part of the video, he was climbing up a tree. And he was, at that time, 40-something years old. And he was telling the interviewer to come up with a tree with me. What that was showing is that he still was fixated in childhood because he did not have a normal childhood.
Right.
And you know that as talented as he was, as popular as he was, you see the challenges he went through.
Yeah.
And that gives you an insight of how impactful your childhood is to your adulthood.
Yeah. And I think one of the things for me is there's the respect piece. Part of that respect piece, I call it the intergenerational transfer. It's when the elders impart wisdom. And so when there's a disconnect, when those elders are not present or not actively involved, then some of the things that I grew up with, you grew up with, and it has nothing to, I mean, finances play a part, but there's always been poverty. There's always been single mothers. There's always been, fathers that were not actively involved in their children's lives. But we weren't always in the state we are in now. And I think the lack of the basic respect where we knew that we were going to respect our elders, that women and children were to be respected. But it was also a two-way street.
Sure.
There was also respect for the men. And it didn't matter what job you had, because one of the things that I find troubling is that there's this adulation of material things, and consumerism. So if you don't have, a certain purse or certain tennis shoes or drive a certain car, then you're less than. And conversely, if you have this stuff, then you are higher on the social scale. And so we've lost the importance of basic values, of respect, of the fact that there is a right and a wrong. And I think the challenge is for us to make a pathway for our young people to connect with older people in a way that they feel, because a lot of times the issue is, if I feel like you're going to reject me, I'm going to reject you first. And so if I'm a young woman, a young man, and you look at me like you're disappointed or disgusted, I'm not going to feel safe, and I'm not going to feel welcome. And I think that is part of the current problem, is that they didn't get the things that we got. They didn't sit, next to grandpa or the uncles or the old man down the street. And so, both males and females, they didn't have the opportunity to learn from those people, and the same with women. There wasn't a grandma or an auntie. There are people right now that have never, sat in the kitchen and watched somebody make a meal from scratch. And so if you haven't seen that, then you don't think that is for you. And so a lot of those traditional values are rejected because they haven't seen it.
And it goes back to, again, the 3 E's, when we have those experiences of being with the elders, or what we call, especially in the African American community, the elders or our ancestors, whether they are present or they've gone on, we know that in every society, in every culture, the impact of the older generation, because they're the ones that have the wisdom. In other words, they've been through the experiences that we might or might not have been through. But one of the biggest strengths, and that's another thing where I focus from a strength-based perspective. That's one of the biggest strengths in our community as a whole. No matter what we've been through, it is a part of our heritage, is to embrace the significance of the elders. In fact, and that's one of the strengths of hip hop. If you look at hip hop now, it's celebrating its 50th anniversary, and that is honoring the origins and the pioneers of hip hop. And what they're finding is that these new artists, no matter things are different. Every generation is different. Every generation a new generation is every 5 years, so it's not going to be the same, right? But we're finding that a lot of the young artists are embracing what the older artists went through, and then that's the beauty of really embracing history. In fact, with young people, it is more important that the elders or older individuals have a one-on-one relationship with them, because this generation needs more one-on-one support from a caring adult or mentor than ever before, because they don't have necessarily, like you said, that village, right? If you have if you're raising yourself, or you happen to be a single parent, you have to work and take care of your child, you might not have that time like you might have had in a two-parent household. We got more families that are working, even that are what we call middle class or middle income. They're having to work more hours just to keep food on the table with inflation and with all of the cost of living. So it's a systematic issue. And it's not just in our community, it's all over. But we have to get back to the basics, like you said, of the village systems supporting, everyone. But more importantly, also understanding that there's intergenerational challenges. When you look in the African American community, in slavery, and even post Middle Passage, when we came over to this country, the family was broken. If you had a wife or a husband, you were sold off in slavery. Your children, you were disconnected. In fact, once we were disconnected, that's when the extended family network was powerful, because you will be generally raising a child. You could be raising a child that you didn't even give birth to. You would be in a family that you weren't even originally born in. And so you think about that trauma, it's passed down to where we are now. And so, but more importantly, with all where we are in society, it's just a thing that where we go back to mental health, is that we have to realize that we have to be aware. In fact, I say everything starts with self-awareness. Once we're self-aware, then we self-correct. So we know the challenges in our community. What are we doing to try to mitigate or try to address them? But once we self-correct, then we have the self-discipline to do it. And we start to, again, it becomes habitual. We do it without even thinking. And you think about yourself as a parent, and, now you're a grandparent, you've been able to get to that stage where you can have the wisdom to be able to pass on and to give back to your grandchildren. How powerful is that, to have that kind of influence,
And even in the community, because and you're familiar with our neighbors in our neighborhood.
Sure.
And so we supported each other's children. We encouraged each other's children. And we were willing and able to provide correction when necessary. For instance, one day, Cherie saw Maya walking down the street with somebody that she felt Maya shouldn't be walking down the street with. She pulled her vehicle over, said, "Maya, come here. Come on, get in the car with me." She said, "Call your mom and tell her you're with me." And she said, because it was a person that was not a good person. And she told me, she said, "My son had told me about him. And I just knew that Maya didn't need to be walking down the street with him." But she knew that she could and she should.
Sure.
And so being able to, kindly, gently redirect behavior. And you can, and again, you have to be mindful about who the child is, or even who the adult is, and how to approach them.
Sure.
But what I find is, if you do it with respect and kindness, that you can still, because a lot of people say, "Oh, you can't reach these kids nowadays." And yes, you can. There were people that thought that, I was out of control or I was wrong, but they were still willing to step up and pull me back. And so I think we still have to have faith and believe that all is not lost. And I think the other thing is just showing some grace, understanding that people have been through some things, and that in order for them to recover, there has to be forgiveness and there has to be grace.
And you made a great point. I mean, here's when we look at we all here because of grace and mercy, right? There was no perfect. If you would have knew me 20 years, I wouldn't say 20, maybe longer than that, 30 years ago, you know, you wouldn't even know that I was in all kinds of, I had all kinds of challenges. I mean, I was expelled from the public school system of Baltimore in the sixth grade, you know, you know, I was, you know, gotten, you know, involved in some legal trouble. But there were people that cared enough to pour into me. You know, and my parents, you know, and they did as well. I mean, they, you know, like any other parent, you know, it's tough raising children. But you brought up earlier how important that village is, and using, and also the example of what you brought about with Cherie in the neighborhood. We no longer have a neighborhood in many places. Is what they call. That's why they call the hood. It's not neighbors. You know, some neighborhoods, the neighbors don't even speak. They don't even. You know, they don't even interact with one another. They go home. They, you know, if you have a driveway, you pull in your driveway. You in your own home, and there's no interaction. Well, we see that in your example how important it is to have a relationship with people that we are in existence with. And so I think that you brought up a great point, is that we need to really promote having a neighborhood, being neighbors, being in a relationship with one another, versus
and
just
building community. Because and no matter where, like whether it's community in the schools, community where you work, community through the church, it's like we have got to, there is a longing for connection and compassion, and just gentle touch. You know, everybody needs to be hugged. You know, you need to be touched gently. We had a woman on the podcast a while back, and she's a massage therapist, and she does lymphatic massage. And she said what she wants to do is work with women that have been abused, because she wants them to understand what gentle touch feels like. Because a lot of them have never had that. And me too. You know, if you've never had the opportunity for somebody just to, you know, without any sexual connotations, but to be in an environment where it's warm, it's welcoming, it's comforting. It's a basic need that so many people don't get.
And you hit the nail right on the head. Again, like I said earlier, it starts with you know, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It starts at the bottom level. One, your physiological needs, right? You know, just having your base human survival needs. And then it goes into feeling safe. You know, your next level, which it includes protection from harm, right? And that also promotes emotional stability and just well-being and security. But then when we get to the mid-level, it's the love and belonging. You know, it's important for when we're coming to the world for us to feel that we belong, that we are valued, that we're appreciated, that we're respected, right? And that carries into our adulthood, until the day we leave. And then when we get to esteem needs, you know, this is about our ego, that we're, you know, we've had our needs met. Now we're being driven to have confidence to grow, right? To be successful. And when
Okay. I hope that the information, I hope that you learned something, and that it gave you something to think about. The main things that I got from the interview was the fact that even when we make mistakes, even when we lose our way, there can be redemption. And that we can continue to find our path. And I think so often in society, we're ready to write people off. And we act like we haven't fallen down or we haven't made mistakes. And we have to have systems, personally and socially, in place to provide an opportunity for people to get back up and get back on track. The other thing that I thought was important was when he talked about the 4 E's: experience, exposure, education, and environment. And I think that as we move forward, particularly when it comes to mental health, and he spoke more about mental health in men, but I think a lot of that is just across the board true. And so as we think about our own mental health and the mental health of those around us, I'm hoping that we can find ways and tools to help each other. Do I have any comments or questions from the audience?
Permission to speak?
Oh, yes, definitely.
First of all, grand rising to everybody that's on the line. I come in peace. Great interview. There's no other word for what I was just listening to, but great interview. It was a lot of information. A lot of information usually, I talk about without the degree. Man, I could touch on so many things that was said there. But his work and what he does is definitely needed. I'm sitting here just elated that we couldn't get a chance to talk to him and ask him questions. That's the only thing I'm lacking right now with that. But all in all, it was a great interview. I could touch on a lot of things. I mean, the ghetto. I mean, not the ghetto. You called it the gangster rap music. Rap music started with dance. Then it was graffiti. We go back that far with Kool Herc and all in when it was music. He talked about the kids. I often say when you hear me talk and speak sometimes, because the work he do, I've done for 39 years, but without the degree. And I volunteered, never got paid, never wanted to get paid. But I often say when we're working with these young people, is that we have to also work with their parents, because if we don't, then it's almost pointless. And so I'll use myself as an example, and it's just an example. If where I'm at in my life is because my parents didn't teach me anything, and they're that way because their parents didn't really teach them anything, and so forth. And so here we are at the new age, and we have lost so many of our young people due to a lot of things. And one of the things he pointed out was he dealt with kids that's 3. I can't even imagine a kid that's 3 already have to be mentored like that. I've never had experience on mentoring a kid that was 3. I taught the kids, held kids, changed their pampers, this, that, but to mentor them like that, I can't even imagine. And so what I want to say with that is, great interview. I'm trying to, in my mind, find a way how we can put this together to get him, or we can get together with him to have him speak up here or on some kind of platform, because that was a great interview. And with that, I regress.
And Leon, what I want to say to you is the work that you have done has been powerful. And it's not necessarily the degree, it's the knowledge and being willing to share that knowledge. The degree, society will give you certain opportunities because of a degree, but you gave of yourself because you cared. And I want to tell you that for you and other people on this platform that have shown up in the community and said, I'm going to pour into you, I'm going to guide you, I'm going to help you, that is an honorable thing to do. And I have great respect for those that saw it as their mission to make the world a better place.
Thank you. And I just want to say the reason why I've done this for 39 years, and some of the people on this line, they remember my first kids show on Talking with Leon. They remember the kids that came up. I didn't even know that I affected their lives in that way, and they felt like that about me. But the reason why is because I was them. I was out here running around like a chicken with my head cut off, thinking I was representing the hood, not knowing that I was creating more damage than good. So, you know, when I went to jail and came home, when I was in jail, I said when I got out, I was going to give my life back to the kids of the neighborhood and of the neighborhoods. And so that's what I did. And thank you for that. I appreciate that.
And each of us has something that we can give. We were not made to be the same. And so our skills, our talents are all going to be different. But there is value in each and every one of us. And there is someone that needs what you have to give. And what that skill is, what that talent is, and how you decide to share it will vary. But I love the Grown Folks Talking platform because it allows us to reach a multitude of people, and it allows us to share ideas and information. And it is a place where we may have differences of opinion, but we are saying, let's talk about it. Let's think about it. Let's be intentional about building community. And I think that's a good thing. Do we have any other questions or comments? Well, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for being a part of this grace-based family. We want to make sure that you're aware of the upcoming programs. So on Tuesday from 7:30 to 9:30, we have the Pink Sofa with Carol Lucille. The first and third Tuesdays are ladies only. On Wednesdays at 6 o'clock, we have No Longer Silent with Francesca. At 8 o'clock, it's Vision Care with John Monroe. And at 9:30, the Concerned Citizens Coalition with Everett and Hamp. I want to invite you to go to YouTube and go to Grown Folks Talking, and you will have an opportunity to listen to and share the various programs. So you go to Grown Folks Talking, and then it will list the other programs. And we would love for you to listen, to share the information with other people. And also when you call in prior to the show starting, there's a recording that will let you know about our lineup. So thank you again for spending time with us. We do value this time, and we are grateful that you chose to spend some time with us. And in closing, as always, we would like to say, Grace looks amazing on you. Have a wonderful evening.